before we start, I wanted to let you know that I'm really thankful for you doing this and taking your time doing this, and that since this is an interview about your life, we will be focusing mainly on your service in World War II. This will be really, really valuable for future generations. And so the purpose of this interview is to highlight the reality of war, basically in order to educate future generations. But I can guarantee that only good things can come out of this, okay? So, only good things can be learned from your story. So, I really cannot thank you enough for doing this.
Well, I'm glad to do it.
Good. Okay, so can you spell out your full name for me, please?
John, John, George, George, Rothfus, Rothfus, and Jr.
Awesome. And can you say your full name, what military branch you were in, and the unit and what role you were?
Well, John G. Rothfus Jr. I was in the Army Air Force, and I was overseas. I was in the 98th Bomb Group. It was the 15th Air Force, and 345th Squadron.
Okay. And what was your role?
Tail gunner.
Okay. So, when and where were you born?
I was born in Saxe, Texas on October the 25th, 1924.
Okay. So, you were born in Saxe, so did you grow up there or did you grow up around here in Salina?
We lived there till I was 6 years old and moved to Carrollton. My daddy bought a bigger farm, and we stayed in Carrollton 6 years, and when I was 12 years old, we moved to the Prosper area.
Okay. So, can you tell us about your growing up years, what you did?
Well, you know, I had 10 brothers and sisters, and there was 4 girls, 3 boys, and 4 more girls, and I was the oldest boy. And we were poor. We didn't have anything. There wasn't anything for you to do when you were kids, and so we just did the best we could. And the boys, we all participated in sports, so we played sports all the time, and that's mostly. And before I left Saxe, before we moved from Saxe, when I was 6 years old, that was kind of a community that raised onions. Not a lot of them, because there's a lot of work to onions, to setting them out and then gathering them. And I worked in the field when I was 6 years old. And then we moved to Carrollton, and I'm older sisters, and I'm sure they made me work the field when I was just a kid. So in the summertime, mostly we were working in the field and school, and we started school. Well, we maybe come home after school and have to work in the field.
Okay. So, what kind of things did you do for fun as a child? Did you play any games?
Not much. We played. Well, I had these older sisters. They played jacks. I'd play jacks with them, and I could beat them all. And my daddy taught us how to play dominoes a little bit, and so we'd usually play dominoes with him.
Okay. So you mentioned your brothers and sisters, correct?
Yeah.
So did any of them serve during the war?
My brother just next to me got in the war right before the end of the war, and he was in the Navy. And he actually, the war might have been over. Well, I guess it was over, and he served in the Pacific area on, I don't remember what kind of ship he was on, but he didn't serve too long. And then my younger brother, actually, they kept the draft going, I guess, and he got drafted and served, but he was here in the, well, this is probably during the Korean War. He did go overseas.
And what was your younger brother's name?
David Rothfus. And the middle brother was Billy Rothfus.
Okay. So, can you tell us about any of the struggles your family faced during the Great Depression?
Well, it was just not necessarily. We just had to work on the farm, and you didn't make any money, but we always had plenty of food. You know, we grew most of the food, and we always had good food to eat, and my mother was a good cook, and I can remember, I don't know how she stood it, but we didn't have electricity, and she cook in the kitchen and make biscuits 2 or 3 times a day. It'd be 100 degrees, you have a kerosene cook stove going. You just can't imagine what it was like, you know. And she was a big woman and had all these kids, and when the girls got old enough to help in the kitchen, well, she'd get disgusted trying to teach them something. She said, "Get out, I can do it better myself."
So was your mother more of a housewife? She stayed and took care of the house?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And
she never worked in the field. A lot of housewives worked in fields, but she never worked in the field.
Okay. And what job did your father have?
Well, just working on the farm and planting and gathering crops and milking cows. And when I was, I guess, about 12 or 13 years old, I had to start milking a cow. And you have to get up in the morning early and milk a cow, and then late that afternoon milk it again, you know.
How do you milk a cow? What was that like? Do you remember your first experience?
Yeah, you just grab a hold and mash up here, and then when you got the milk trapped up there, and then when you close your fingers, it forces it out. And used to sometimes there'd be an old cat around, and you give it a squirt.
Okay. So, when you were a teenager, did you and any of your buddies get into any mischief? Were you a troublesome teenager?
No, not really. We didn't cause any trouble, cause you get a razor strap on your butt. And I know we were all good kids. My brother, just younger than me, my mother told my daddy one time, she said, "John," said, "you're going to have to do something with Bill. He's pretty mischievous." So my daddy would read the Bible every night by kerosene light. And Daddy told Billy, I don't know what it was, he'd give him a dime or a quarter or something like that if he'd learn the 23rd Psalm. Well, he thought it would take him a week or two to learn it. The next day, he knew the 23rd Psalm.
Okay, so what were the first few jobs you had growing up?
First job, Well, I didn't. I guess really the first job you consider was milking a cow, you know. But of course, I'd worked in the field for years before then. But you didn't really have a job. Just when come need work, well, you did it.
So, where did you go to school, and were you able to graduate?
Where did I go to school? Well, I went to school, when we moved to Prosper, I went to school at Ray's Mill. And they had a 2-grade school, 2-room school, and two teachers. And a teacher and his wife a man and his wife were teachers. And I was in the 5th grade, and you'd be 6 or 8 in each room, each class, you know. And so I finished. We had a softball team and a little basketball team. It was all outside. The basketball court was a dirt field, you know. And I was a good softball player, and I was, like I say, a year older than what most kids were. And I was a good softball player, and we played football a little bit, you know, just scrimmage, throw it around. And when I finished school at Ray's Mill, we were working in the field one day at home, and a man came by the school from McKinney, and somebody had told him I was a good athlete, and he said, "We need football players. If you go to school in McKinney, we'll help pay his way." Well, my mother told me, "He's not going to McKinney, he's going to Prosper." I didn't know anything about it till it was all over. She didn't ask me, you know.
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1943.
Okay. So, what do you remember hearing about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
You know, I don't really remember much about that, but I remember people saying, you know, well, the war will be over. You know, they knew it'd be in war. The war will be over before I ever have to go, but it wasn't.
So, when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened, how did some other people react? Did some of your buddies or your peers enlist?
I didn't understand that.
Sorry. So, after Pearl Harbor, did some of your friends enlist?
Yeah, there was friends, a good many of them enlisted. And boys in school enlist, you know, probably juniors or seniors, they'd enlist. But I wasn't interested in it, you know. And
okay, so can you take us how you entered the service? So you were drafted?
yeah. Well, but I guess it was just before the 6 months deferment was up, and I decided I'd just go ahead and get in a little early before they drafted, and I tried to get in the Air Force. I really wanted to be a pilot, but I wasn't qualified to be a pilot. But I went over to McKinney to draft board and told them I wanted to enter to go in service in the Air Force. So I think that draft deal shows I entered, and then I didn't leave for service for about 3 weeks. And so when I did, well, they sent me to Mineral Wells it was an induction center, and so that's how I got in.
So when you entered the service, can you tell us about the different training areas they sent you to?
Well, we went to Mineral Wells, and it was induction center, and you did a little bit of training, a little marching, you know. And then they sent me to Wichita Falls for basic training. And we marched in calisthenics and just stayed busy all the time, you know, for, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. And then sent me to, well, they had me, I was actually in the Army Air Force, and they sent me to an Army airfield at Laredo, Texas. And that's when we started training to fly, you know, and they taught us how to use guns, and we used a pistol and a Thompson machine gun, and finally the 50 caliber machine gun that was on the bombers. And they taught us how to take them apart and put them together, and then we had to learn how to assemble them, put them together blindfolded, you know. But that was really useless, because there wasn't any case you couldn't take a gun out while she's up flying if it malfunctioned, you know. So that was the last of that. But we did fly, and we shot at ground targets and with a machine gun, you know. They had B-24 bombers, and I was back in the tail turret, and we'd shoot at ground targets. And so then when that was over, we went to Tucson, Arizona, and the crews were assembled. And they assembled, of course, I was a tail gunner. There was a guy from Vernon, Texas, that was a nose gunner, and he was my really good friend. And I mean, he wound up, he was. But we'd fly missions just every day or two. You'd fly, and one time we'd practice bombing too, but we didn't have a bombardier. And finally they gave us a bombardier, and he was a guy named Cargman from New York. And so we were going on a bombing mission one day, and us peons, us enlisted men, privates, had to load the bombs, and they were little old 100-pound bombs about that long. And you know, they didn't have very much explosive in them. But this bombardier, we had about a half a dozen loaded, and this bombardier got up in his compartment, was checking switches, and bombs started falling. Well, we took off and started running, and when it was all over, the navigator was standing outside watching us, and he said, "I tell you one thing, Johnny's the fastest one here. When I got ready to run, he was coming back." And you know, one time overseas, they would, well, I may be getting ahead of you, but they had, the missions would, if a mission was scheduled for the next day, that they'd load the bombs at night. Well, for some reason, they were worried about something, and each airplane had one man stay in it. So I was staying in one of the bombers, and the next morning I heard this noise, and I got to checking, and they were unloading 500-pound bombs. And they was dropping them out on the asphalt and rolling them away and drop another one. But you know, the bombs were never armed till you got up in the air, and there was a wire on the bomb, and you hooked that in the plane, and when it dropped out, it armed the bomb. So anyway, I didn't need to run then. But they'd schedule a mission every day if they would, and if the mission was canceled, which was a whole lot because it was winter time and you're flying formation. You can't fly in cloudy, foggy weather, and so they'd take the bombs out.
So, how did the military decide who would be best for each job?
I don't know anything about that. I'm sure they just picked a man, and they didn't really probably test or anything for it, but I'm sure that's the way it was.
So, what was it like to meet your crew for the first time? What were your thoughts about the other guys?
Well, I don't really remember, but it was just a group of guys like meeting anybody else, and I don't remember really.
Gotcha.
But I know the bombardier was a guy from Springfield, Massachusetts. The ball turret guy that was from Springfield, Massachusetts, and he was the guy that was kind of obnoxious. He was kind of a smart type guy, and I never did learn to like him too good, but I got along with him, had to, but they maybe now in that ball turret they picked a pretty small guy because it was cramped and hard to get in and wasn't much room, and so he was the smallest guy on the crew, I think.
Do you remember any of their names?
Oh yeah, I remember all of them.
Can you list them off?
Yeah, I think. The nose gunner was Duckworth. The top turret gunner was McLean. Ball turret gunner was Vogel. And of course I was the tail gunner. And then the radio operator was Schamberg. And the top turret gunner, the engineer was Smith from Toledo, Ohio. And they sometimes, we had two waist guns, one on each side, kind of to back up in front of the tail turret, and they manned the waist guns if we'd needed to use. Of course, we never had fighter protection opposition. I never fired a gun in all the missions I flew, but we had a lot of anti-aircraft fire. Every target nearly bombed was loaded with guns, and they'd tell you before you, like one of the target we bombed 3 or 4 times was Vienna, Austria. We were bombing in Austria, and railway yards and bridges. And they'd tell you, when you bomb Vienna, they'd tell you they have 288 millimeter guns and about 100 or so 105 millimeter, which is a bigger gun. And you start over the target, and 2 or 3 miles before you get there, the whole sky'd be full of black puffs of shells exploding. And then you had to fly through that,
Okay. So let's see. So where was your aircrew based?
We were based at Lecce, Italy. It was Foggia Air Force Base. And it was, I didn't realize it, but till I got to reading the book about it, there were several bases around there. Like George McGovern, ran for president one time. He was a pilot on a B-24 at another base there.
What was it like journeying overseas for the first time?
Well, it wasn't much fun on the ship, It was the first time I'd ever been on it, and I nearly got seasick, but flying is kind of like on a ship, and especially flying formation, you know, you're speeding up and slowing down, and if you turn, if you're on the, you slow down if you're on the inside, and or speed up if you're on the outside, and it was, and then what? Of course, there wasn't anything to do, so you watch guys gambling all the time, nearly. They were playing shooting dice and playing cards, and I never did any of that.
So what did you do in your free time on the ship and when you were stationed?
Just nothing. You didn't have anything to do. Just sat around and talk and sleep, maybe, like we were overseas, and we were there were 6 of us enlisted men on a crew and 4 officers, and we 6 of us stayed in one tent, and they were in the officers section in a tent, the 4 of them, and I slept a lot. I could sleep all day and all that. And this bombardier, I'm not bombardier, but the ball turret gunner, like I say, he didn't like me much. He kidded me about sleeping so much. And one day I was asleep, and you slept on cots. He grabbed one side of my cot and dumped me out on the floor. It kind of made me mad, and I picked him up, and I was going to take him outside and throw him down. And he was like a cat. You couldn't get loose of him. Well, let me back up. In training, back when they taught you to shoot guns, you know, they taught you how to, if you was shooting at a fighter, of course, if he's coming straight at you, you shot at him. But if he's coming over the side, you had to lead him a little bit or less, you know, or lead him, you know. Well, they taught us to shoot skeet. That's kind of fun, you know. And we'd shoot, they'd have 2 stations. We'd learn how we'd shoot one, and then finally we'd go to shooting at one, and another would come out, and you'd have to shoot. Yeah. Well, they also had a course there that was probably half a mile around. It was a road, and they had skeet deals all the way around it, and where the skeet came at you to a different direction. You know, have one right on the corner, you'd be turning the corner. And you had to learn how to lead them in all those different things. That was kind of fun. You ride in the back of a pickup truck with an instructor and 2 guns, and the guy that was doing the shooting, he'd shoot and hand you the gun. You'd have the other one loaded, and you just load the guns, and then come your time, well, he'd load the guns. And that was kind of fun.
So
was that a shotgun?
Yeah.
Skeet shooting.
So did you use a shotgun for skeet shooting? Yeah.
I don't remember what gauge it was, but it was, I guess, a single shot. When you were shooting a 2, it had to be a 2 shell deal or more, you know.
So, were you a pretty good shot?
I was average, I guess.
All right. Take 2. Okay. So, if you can tell us again what type of plane you flew in, and can you describe it?
Well, I flew in the B-24 bomber. That's the only thing I ever flew in, and it had the 4 turrets and had, I guess it was 8 guns, two machine gun in each turret, and it was 10-man crew and 4 officers and 6 enlisted men, and That's all I ever flew in. I'm sure it was the latest. I don't know what model it was, but I'm sure the latest one. Recently, they had an air show in Dallas and had a B-24 down there. And a guy took me down there, and I got to crawl up in the back end of it. But it was the first model. It didn't have turrets. It had one gun in each, where each turret was.
Okay. What was that like, being back in a B-24?
Well, it wasn't much fun, really. It kind of had to crawl up a ladder to get in there, and it's kind of hard. And I also got to go up in the B-29 down there. And I was really surprised. It's the back end, and on B-29, when you go from the back end up the front, there's a tunnel about that big around where I guess it's 20 feet long or so. You crawled through it. I didn't want to go up there.
Okay, and what kind of bomb load did your plane carry?
Well, I think it was probably a maximum of 8,000 pounds or something like that. I'm not sure.
Okay. Let's see. So, can you tell us about your duties as a tail gunner?
What?
Can you tell us about your duties as a tail gunner?
Well, really, there wasn't much duties other than just win a mission and you get in your turret and check everything and just ride, you know. And like I say, we didn't have any fighter opposition, so we were really worthless.
How many missions did you fly?
Well, I flew 18 total, and the war was over. I wasn't over there about 4 or 5 months. And on the 4th mission, we got an engine shot out. And when your engine won't run, you have to turn the propeller blades into the wind to keep the wind from turning it like a windmill. And it got the oil pressure, and they couldn't feather that prop, so the wind kept turning it, and it burnt the engine up. And the engine got to vibrating, the prop and the engine vibrating, and the engine fell off. Well, the pilot says, we were headed back. He said, we can make it back on 3 engines. But it got our gasoline too, so we had to bail out. There was 4 of us bailed out. And they got too low. We were too low. And I don't know why. Well, let me back up. When you're in your turrets, you don't wear a parachute. There's not room. We had the harness. We wore the harness, and the parachute's a little chest pack about that long, about this big around, and it just snaps on to your harness. And when he told us to get out of our turret or to put our parachute on, I got out and I didn't hook up to intercom because there was a guy there in the waist window that had intercom. So I was going to do what he said, And I've always regretted it because, we didn't really talk about a lot of this stuff when we got back. It was a job and we'd done it. And I don't know why they waited till we got so low to bail out, and then it wasn't high enough for everybody to bail out, and I don't know that. But we had to cross the Adriatic Sea, and it might have been, we might have started, and the gas got to giving problems, and I don't know that.
So, let's see.
So what happened to the other people?
Yeah, so what happened to your other crewmates?
Well, all of them, the other 6 were up on the flight deck, and they crashed. They actually landed, but they landed in an olive orchard. It's trees, and it tore up the plane, you know, and finally, and also over there was lots of brick walls around farms, you know, or places, you know. And when the plane stopped, the nose of it was up against one of those brick walls, and it was just all underneath part of it was tore up, and the pilot got a head banged up. I don't know what he hit, and the navigator had a leg hurt, but nobody else actually was hurt much. And I think you noticed on my deal I got a Purple Heart. I wasn't hurt. I don't know why they gave us a Purple Heart, but I've always I didn't deserve a Purple Heart. It was after that, you know, and maybe because of going down a foreign country they might have gave it to us, but.
So, what was it like jumping out of a plane?
Well, there and again, the guy that was in the waist with me, he told me, he said, we got to jump. So we opened that hatch at the back on the bottom. It was about that long, about this wide. And he hooked his feet at one side of it and had his shoulder and head. So he said, now push me. Well, I pushed him, and I don't know why. He just scared to go, I guess. So I just got down there like he was, and then I went, and I was on the ground in just a little bit, you know, and there was a time I got on my GI, you couldn't wear your GI shoes with you, and all this on. We wore, you got in there somewhere about temperature. I remember the pilot saying one time it was 59 below zero in the plane. That's pretty cool, you know. And we wore electric heated suits, just like an electric blanket, and little moccasins that snapped on to your, or little gloves that snapped on, and shoes, you know. So you couldn't wear your GI shoes. So they always told us to, if you have to bail out, tie the strings together and just hold them. Well, when I got on the ground, of course, we'd always talked about it. If you bail out, when you pull that rip cord, well, save it, keep it, you know. My rip cord's gone, but I had my shoes. But it wasn't bad at all, you know.
Okay. Let's see. So, while we're on the topic of you bailing out and crashing, can you tell us the full story of how and where you were shot down?
How what?
Can you tell us the full story of how and where you were shot down?
Well, we were in Yugoslavia on the way back. We always crossed Yugoslavia, and it wasn't in the war. And when I got on the ground, there was a little old woman and looked like a 12-year-old boy standing there. And we were right close to a farmhouse, and they took me up there. They grabbed up my parachute and took me up there, and sat me down in a dining area with an old wooden long dining table with a bench on each side, and they brought out almonds picked out, and it was some kind of a dried fruit, a fig or something. I don't know if it was dried fruit, but it tasted good, and the almonds were good. And then they had a bottle of, I don't know what it was, some wine probably. And to this day, I've never tasted beer or drank any kind of alcoholic beverage, but it didn't taste good. So anyway, we were just sitting there, and of course I couldn't talk to them. They didn't know my language, and I didn't know theirs. And about 15 minutes, I guess, I bet there was 15 teenage girls showed up. I don't know where in the world they come from, but they showed up there, and the first thing they did was take my parachute and cut those lines off of it. I guess they were going to use the parachute for material for dresses probably. It's silk, you know. So there went my parachute, but I wouldn't have carried it anyway, you know. But so I stayed there a couple of hours, and they took me down a little old road to another house, and there was an old man that could speak a little English. So then I sat around there talking to him some, and I don't know, this all happened about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And about, I guess, 5 or 6, they brought in one of the other guys that had bailed out. And later on, before that, the third one, and the fourth one never did show up. But we weren't a few miles from Split, that little town, or maybe 2 or 3 miles from it. And we spent the night there. They cooked the evening meal, and I don't remember what it was, but I remember they cooked the breakfast for us, and we had, my mother always cooked our eggs. She'd break the yellow, you know, and cook them hard, done. They had sunny side up eggs. It like to make me sick eating that egg. But we had some kind of greens for breakfast besides those eggs. But and then up in the morning, while they took us down a little road, and we got on a little old boat in a little old river, and took us to town, and got down there, and the rest of the crew was all in this hotel. It was a British mission over there that rounded up guys like us and got them back to the base. Well, that first guy that bailed out, Vogel, he hadn't shown up. We still hadn't seen him. And we didn't know what happened to him. And we were there, we stayed in this hotel for about 5 days. They didn't have any furniture in it. But we slept on the concrete floor on an army blanket, and they fed us army rations, C rations and K rations, and we did that for 5 days. And actually, there was a piano there, a big upright type piano, and there wasn't anybody in the hotel, but it was right there in the lobby across the front. The pilot and the engineer were both good piano players. So they had sat down at that piano, both of them start playing at the same time, and people outside would just gang around and listen. And we get out and walk around town. Well, anyway, this survival kit that we had, we'd opened them up, and there was $50 American money in each one. And we got to walking in stores, you know, it was like a downtown area, and they saw some accordions for sale. Well, them playing the piano, they thought they'd like to have accordions, so they took our money and bought 2 accordions. I thought many times, that was back when $1 would buy anything, and we spent all of our $50 on accordions. But those kits had had those maps in it. They had maps of all of that country. And then we had some kind of a high potency candy bar or something. and the $50 American money, and I don't remember it, but George McGovern said that those kids had a shot of morphine in it, so they probably did, you know, I don't know, but anyway, he said they had them in it. In that book he wrote, he said they had them. But, so anyway, in about 5 days, they took us out to a little air base, and we flew back to Italy we did fly on a P-47. That's the only time I flew in anything besides a B-24. And I think one of the questions, did I ever fly before? I'd never flown before I got in service.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm gonna go back here real quick. Can you close the blinds a little?
Yeah.
It's overexposed.
Good.
Yeah, much better. Okay. So, let's see. Can you tell us about your very first mission into enemy territory?
You know, I think on our very first mission, we got getting pretty close to the target, and one of our engines went out, and we had to go back. We didn't never make it to the target, and before you land, they wanted you to get rid of your bombs, so we dropped the bombs out in that Adriatic Sea, and. And another thing you asked about, could we see the damage? No, you never could. You could see the explosion, but that's about all you could see. You know, you were 28,000 feet high, and it was 5 miles from the target, you know, so you couldn't tell anything about what you hit. But I know one time the Methodist Church years ago had a choir director that took the choir on a tour overseas, and they went to Vienna, Austria, and we'd bombed it 3 or 4 times. And they come back, and our neighbor across the street had gone with them, and she said, "Oh, I also heard over there that we went to a church over there, and they said, the people in church said, they missed the target and hit the church."
Okay, let's see. So, what kind of enemy targets did your plane go after?
Basically, it was railway yards, as supply lines, and bridges, you know. That's probably, the bridges probably what we dropped those 2,000-pound bombs on. I don't remember, but I remember we bombed something up in the mountains one time, and they didn't have many guns, but I guarantee you they would get closer to you than most time than they did in Vienna. But
So, did you have any other experiences against German anti-aircraft fire?
You know, it asked in there about damage. Well, half the time I bet you'd wind up with little holes, flak holes in your plane, you know. But usually, and one time the radio operator got a hole through his sleeve, just nicked his sleeve, and that's the only time nobody ever got hit by any aircraft fire. But one time, well, we bombed there, and we never went into Germany until about our last 2 missions. We flew into Germany and bombed jet airfields. And you know, the German jet fighters, but they that was right before the war ended, and they were running out of fuel and didn't have the fuel. And we saw one jet fighter come up behind us over at the side went way up above us and disappeared. But that's the only fighter I ever saw. And those two targets, two jet airfields, the first one that we bombed, they told us that you're bombing one that doesn't have any anti-aircraft fire. One of them did and one didn't. And you're going to fly at a lower altitude, at like 18,000 feet instead of 26 or 8. Well, we bombed the wrong one, and we were lower, and we like to got our tail shot off. We had about 40 holes in the plane, and we got one gas tank shot out, and that scared me more than anything, because that black gasoline made a white vapor trail, and I kept thinking we was going to blow up, you know. But we had to land at emergency air base and get gas before we get back. We didn't lose many planes. One time, the siren, I didn't fly that day, we didn't fly, and the base siren went off, and we all went outside to see what was happening, and it was 24 coming in, and when it got close to the base, you could see it, and it's one wing, about 5 feet of it, was bent up. Well, it had gone down on top of a B-24 in formation and tore his tail off, and they lost that crew at sea. But one with the wing bent up didn't hurt. Nobody was hurt on that.
So, did you ever see another plane get hit by...
No.
No? Did you ever have fighter escorts?
Yeah, we did all the time. And it was these Tuskegee black pilots flying P-51 Mustangs. I saw one of those guys. There was a fish place in Allen, Texas, and it was a popular place. And this guy one of those pilots come to that restaurant every so many days and brought a bunch of stuff to display, and I went down there. My sister lived in Allen, and we went over there and I visited with him a little bit.
What was that like, talking with him?
Well, it was enjoyable, you know.
Do you remember his name?
No, I don't.
Do you remember if he was one of the ones escorting you?
No, I don't have any idea.
Gotcha. Let's see. Okay. So, did you have any other close calls while flying out there?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Okay, well, here are the final questions. So, how did you come back home?
I came back home on a troop ship. It had lots of, I don't know, I think maybe several thousand people on it. And I didn't know it till the last day or two. It took us about, 12 days or so. And I don't remember the name of it, but Red Skelton was on it as troop personnel entertainment. And I didn't know it till it was too late, but when I saw him, he would be walking around, had on PFC uniform, and there'd always be a bunch of soldiers following him, and he'd always be cracking jokes about second lieutenants, you know.
So what was your reunion with your family like?
Well, you know, there wasn't any telephones. My folks didn't have a phone. So all this time you're overseas, I wrote them a letter probably 2 or 3 a week, and my girlfriend, I wrote her all the time. And so when I got to Dallas, Well, when we got back to the States, they sent us to Randolph Field in San Antonio, and we stayed 2 or 3 days, and then they let us come home on leave. When I got to Dallas, I called my girlfriend at work and met her, and in the meantime, I think one of my sisters worked at Tachi's in downtown Dallas, and I went down there to see her and walked up in front of her, and she went to cry, and she said, and all the workers around there thought it was her husband, but it was her brother. But then I had her call the school in Prosper, and it was while school was going, and there was a bus that used to run from little old 10, 12 passenger that run from Dallas to Sherman every day. I don't know how many trips, but morning, well, this was in the middle of the afternoon, I guess, or so. So they called the school and told them I was in Dallas and I'd be home that afternoon, and told them what time bus I was catching. So I remember we come up over the hill. My folks lived on 1461, about a half a mile east of Preston Road. It's the first farm over there. It's Highland Meadows, the first housing development. Highland Meadows, and you know, there's a little church down there on the Coyton, at Coyton, 1461. It's City on the Hill now is the name of it. And so they called it school. And my younger brother he never did get over about 5'5" or 5'6". He was little. And he met me in the car up there. And I remember we come over the hill, I could see him quarter mile up there. Oh, that's embedded in my brain, seeing him. And it was just wonderful to get on, I'll tell you.
So were any of the men from your hometown who signed up, were any of them killed in the war?
Oh yeah, there was. I don't remember offhand now, but there was.
Let's see. So, can you tell us how you met your wife?
Well, I met her at the basketball game in Prosper, at a little store across the street from the basketball game.
Gotcha. Did you make the first move, or did she?
I don't know. Like I say, I was pretty bashful back in those days.
Okay. And do y'all have any children?
Yes, we have one daughter, and she has 2 daughters. We have 5 great grandkids.
Wow.
One of them just graduated. The oldest one is 22. She just graduated from Auburn, Alabama. They live at Colleyville, Grapevine, and she's just graduated, and she majored in something social, and she minored in Spanish. She speaks Spanish perfectly, you know. And I asked her where she's going to work, and she said, I'll get a job in a children's hospital. So, and she was in the Methodist church. They went to Methodist church in Grapevine, and this Central District of Methodist Church, she was president of the youth. And they had one of the big meetings, and there was 400 kids, I think, and she had to make a 20-minute speech. She pretty sharp old girl. She didn't get it from me.
Okay. So, what advice would you want to tell your great grandchildren?
I don't want to tell them anything. They're smarter than I am. Just be a good person and go to church and and live a good life.
Okay. What can future generations do to make you feel that the sacrifices of your generation were worth it?
Well, that's another, and I don't really know how to answer it.
That's okay. And how should society remember who were killed in the war?
I don't know that either.
And what kind of person do you want people to remember you as?
Well, just a good person, you know. And I had a birthday in October. I got lots of friends, and on that birthday, I wound up, like senior citizen. They had about 3 birthday cakes there. And I wound up, I think, drugstore, a hangout. There was a couple up there. I think wound up, there was 7 birthday cakes. And I took a piece out of all of them. They was like senior citizen. They brought them up there to eat, but they called them my birthday cake. And then Alma Joe made me a coconut pie. And Rex Mass, the old pharmacist that was here for 40 years, he gave me 6 apple fried pies. So I just got lots of friends. I've for years, my wife's been dead 17 years. I'll bet you in the last 15 years, I've gone to nursing home once a week to visit people I know, And so, like Perry Lee, her husband was there 5 years, and every time she'll send me a card, and she said, "I still thank you for visiting Bob all those years." I went to see him, like every year and every week, and an old fireman I knew in Dallas was in West McKinney in a nursing home, and I went over there to see him. Every Friday I'd go see him, And so I'm not overly religious, but I just try to live a good life and help people, and I give a good bit of money to feed people, And Salvation Army, I got it every other month. Well, I send them a check, and so people have been good to me. I've had a wonderful life.
And I think I forgot to ask, so were any of your hometown friends who enlisted, were they killed in the war?
My hometown friends?
You did.
Well,
it was something like that.
There was a guy that I was in school with 2 years ahead of me at Prosper. He graduated 2 years ahead of me. And he got in and made a pilot. He was a pilot. And he was up in North Dakota, somewhere in that area. And they graduated a whole class of pilots. They was transporting them somewhere, and the plane got hit by lightning, I think, and killed them all. Well, let me back up a little. When we were at Tucson, Arizona, one of the scariest I ever got was we flew a night mission, and it was cloudy, and the sky was continually lit up with lightning, and I was scared to death,
Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up.
Well, that's good.
All right.